Grandma, tonight they're taking everything you own, Mason whispered, barely loud enough to hear over the party noise. I didn't flinch. I kept peeling apples at the kitchen counter, even though my hands had started to tremble. He was 9, too young to lie like that, but not too young to overhear grown-ups whispering about cabins, deeds, and final steps before old folks get confused enough to sign things away. What Rachel and Adam didn't know was, I still had the original deed, and a letter from Bill that could blow their plans to bits. Stick with me until the end. And drop your city in the comments. I want to see where my legacy reached before they tried to erase it. My name is Doris Alcott. I'm 74, and I used to believe love looked like sacrifice. Turns out, love looks like a child tugging your sleeve while everyone else is busy slicing cake and stealing your future. The birthday party had all the usual fuss, streamers, balloon arches, and Thalia's twin sister screeching over the karaoke machine in the living room. I was told to stay in the kitchen. You're better off in there, Mom, Rachel had said. Too crowded outside? Too crowded? In a house I helped pay for. I didn't argue. I never do. Not after I mortgaged my lake cabin to help Adam open his gas station, not after Rachel started calling it her excess property over wine and legal pads. So, I peeled apples. Quietly, the cinnamon pot on the stove bubbled over. I wiped the edge with the same towel I'd used since 1991. Then Mason crept in, no smile, no juice box in hand. Just worry, real worry, etched into that sweet face of his. Grandma, he said, tugging my sleeve. I bent down slightly, thinking he'd ask about cake. Instead, they said tonight, they'll take the house, the truck, even the cabin. Dad said you won't even notice. Even now, writing this, I feel that apple slice still stuck mid-air between the knife and the bowl. I blinked. They were laughing, Mason added. Like it's already done. My stomach clenched. I pressed a slice flat on the counter to steady my hand. The juice seeped into the oat grains like a wound refusing to clot. What else did they say? Sweetheart. Mason glanced behind him, then leaned in. Mom said you signed something last week, but she told Dad it was just a copy, not real yet. But she had a red folder and said she'd finish it tonight. A red folder. That folder had been on the living room desk all week. I thought it was tax stuff. No. That was the power of attorney draft Adam had casually asked me to just look over after dinner Tuesday. Said it would help smooth out paperwork in case I ever needed to slow down a little. Slow down. I walk 3 miles every morning, thank you very much. But I smiled then. I nodded. I trusted. Foolish. You didn't tell them I know, right? I asked Mason. He shook his head hard. No, I just thought you should pack your stuff, just in case. Pack my stuff. They thought I wouldn't notice. But my husband always knew this day would come. In fact, he left me a plan, in a dusty envelope, buried behind his flannel shirts at the cabin. He wrote it in '98, before the stroke. And if they thought this old woman had nothing left but apple slices and soft memories, well, they were about to learn something new. The last time I held that red folder, it was 2007. Bill had just come home from the hospital after his second minor stroke, and we were sitting on the porch of our cabin by Lake Charlevoix. Late September, you could smell wood smoke from the neighbors, and the maples across the lake had just turned that fierce Michigan orange. The kind that made you believe life could still burn bright in its final stretch. We were sipping cider. His hand shook a little when he raised the mug, but he smiled anyway. I don't want this place ever sold, he said. I remember laughing. And what happens if we need to What if Adam's business dream actually takes off? He didn't smile at that. He reached for a folded paper tucked inside the red folder. His fingers fumbled. I took it from him and opened it. A notarized copy of our cabin deed, signed over to both of us, but with a line I hadn't noticed before. In the event of death or incapacitation, it read, Doris Alcott retains sole control. No transfer, no lien, no resale without her written consent. My throat had gone dry. Why didn't you tell me you added this? I asked. Bill stared out over the lake. Because you're too generous, he said. Too soft with people who'll take until you disappear? That line has echoed in my chest ever since. Too soft. I always thought giving was what made you a good mother. A good wife. You give up your career to stay home. You give up retirement savings to help your son chase a dream. You give up weekends, sleep, sometimes even self-respect, just so they know you're there. And when Adam called in 2009, voice brimming with excitement, Mom, it's happening! I just need a little backing. Just a small mortgage on the lake place. We'll pay it back in 2 years tops. I didn't hesitate. I drove into Petoskey myself the next morning, clutching the red folder against my coat. The bank teller wore lip gloss that smelled like peppermint. She smiled as I signed the Lion paperwork, asked if I wanted coffee. I said no. I had apple muffins baking. The smell of cinnamon followed me all the way home. I remember because it was the last time the cabin felt light. That was 15 years ago. The muffins are long gone. Bill is gone too. And the boy I helped raise, the one who used to call me his hero, now thinks he can erase me with a signature and a red folder of his own. At first, it was small things. I'd open the fridge to find almond milk instead of whole. No dairy in the house, Mom? Rachel would chirp. It's better for Mason, and you, too, at your age. Then came the mail. Bills and bank statements rerouted to their address. Adam said it was easier to manage everything together. But I still remember the feel of my own name on an envelope. How it used to mean something. I became the help, drove Mason to school, picked up Rachel's dry cleaning, took out the trash on Wednesdays before sunrise. My reward, a pat on the shoulder maybe, a half-empty coffee cup left on the counter without thanks. But I held on. I held on because Mason would still curl up next to me during cartoons, because he liked my apple pie more than any store-bought cake, because one night, after a bad dream, he whispered, "Grandma, can you stay forever?" I nearly cried then. It wasn't until last spring, just before the azaleas bloomed, that I noticed the shift. I came home from grocery shopping to find Rachel at the kitchen table, laptop open, glasses low on her nose.
"She didn't look up, Mom?"
She said, typing. I moved some of the cabin expenses under our account. Simpler that way. Cabin expenses. I blinked. I didn't know you had the log in. She shrugged. Adam gave me access. You're not great with tech. It's for your protection. For my protection. The same words they used when they took Bill's car keys. The same words the nurse whispered when he stopped recognizing faces. That night, I sat in my room and opened his letter again, the one he left me in the back of the red folder. His handwriting had thinned near the end, but the words were steady. If they ever try to manage you, sure remember, love is not obedience, and legacy is not something you beg to keep. My hand trembled then, just like it did when I read the fine print on that Lion contract in 2009. I had forgotten who I was. I had given them everything. But now I was beginning to remember. It started with a cardigan, a soft lavender one I'd worn for years, not fancy, but it reminded me of the day Bill and I drove to Traverse City just to sit by the bay eating cherry pie out of wax paper. I wore it to Mason's school fundraiser. Thought I looked nice. Simple pearl earrings, hair pulled back neat. Rachel took one look and sighed. "Mom, you're not wearing that, are you?" I paused, hand still on the front buttons. "What's wrong with it?" She tilted her head. "It's just very Grandma." I almost laughed. Wasn't that the point, but she didn't smile. She turned to Adam, standing by the sink, and said louder, "I told you she doesn't get how these things work. It's not the 80s. Adam cleared his throat but didn't say a word, just stirred his coffee. I stood there, cardigan half-buttoned, cheeks warming. The room smelled of burnt toast. Rachel had tried making sourdough again. "I can change," I said softly. No. She waved her hand. "We're late anyway." On the drive, I watched the world blur past bare trees, a faded pumpkin still rotting on someone's porch. I folded my hands in my lap and said nothing. But something had shifted. Later that evening, while Rachel gossiped with the PTA moms and Adam poured wine like a trained waiter, I spotted Mason standing by the hallway. He wasn't smiling. When I walked over, he whispered, "Why was Mommy mean about your sweater?" I blinked hard. "She wasn't mean, sweetheart. Just busy." He looked unconvinced. "She talks different when you're not in the room." That night, as I undressed, I hung the cardigan back on its hook. I didn't wear it again, not because I agreed, but because I knew they were watching. I began to notice the comments more after that. "You really still write checks. That's adorable. You microwave leftovers in plastic? That's not safe anymore, you know. Mom, you sure you want another slice of pie?" Always with a smile, always just sharp enough to cut. And Adam, he'd look away, fiddle with his phone, change the subject, like he couldn't bear to be the bad guy, so he let someone else do it for him. The cardigan still hangs in the closet, faint scent of lavender and dust. Some days I reach for it. Then I remember Rachel's smirk, and I pick something else. The final straw came over lasagna. It was a Sunday. I had just taken the casserole out of the oven, its edges crisped with cheese and tomato. The smell filled the whole kitchen. Something close to warmth. Something close to home. Adam sat at the table, laptop open. Rachel stood behind him, arms crossed. I thought they were reviewing school photos. Instead, Rachel said, "So, we've decided to refinance the cabin utilities through our joint account." I set the pan down, the oven mitt slipping from my fingers. "What do you mean refinance?" She looked at Adam. He didn't meet my eyes. "You know, bundle some of the recurring costs. It's easier for tax season. I mean, it's not like your filing mess was sweet. Too sweet."
I pulled out a chair.
Slowly, "But the cabin's under my name." Adam finally spoke. "Mom, you've been so generous. This just makes things cleaner. We can manage it better now? Cleaner." They wanted my signature, or at least wanted me to stop asking questions. Rachel smiled and pushed a form across the table. Her nails were painted a pale pink. Not a chip in sight. "It's not a big deal, just a simple transfer, no real change. All the control stays with us." "I mean with you?" She laughed. My hand froze halfway to the paper. I could feel the heat from the lasagna still rising beside me. The scent of garlic, bubbling sauce, and betrayal. "I'd like to read it first," I said. Rachel's smile tightened. "Of course. Just don't wait too long. There's deadlines." I stood, quietly. "I'll have it looked over." Adam looked up. "You don't trust us?" I stared at him. "No," I said. "I trust myself." I carried the pan to the counter. My legs felt heavier than they had in weeks. Rachel whispered something behind me. I couldn't catch the words, but I caught the tone. Dismissive, like I was a child refusing her vegetables. That night I didn't sleep. I reread Bill's letter twice. His words blurred under my lamp. I remembered how he once told me, "Char, if they start managing your life, love has turned into leverage I'd spent years giving, and now?" They saw that as weakness. Not love, not choice, just room to take more. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Tuesday morning came with fog and coffee that tasted faintly of soap. I had just folded the dish towel when Rachel appeared in the doorway. Clipboard in hand, ponytail tight, perfume too sharp for that early hour. "Hey, Doris," she said. Not looking up. "Quick thing. The accountant needs a signature for the cabin." My hand froze on the sink. "What for?" She smiled. "Just a 199 update, real estate forms. You know, all that IRS lingo." I dried my hands. "Slowly. I thought the cabin didn't generate income." Rachel shrugged. "Well, technically not, but because we help manage it. The gas? The security, maintenance. It needs to be listed under a family trust. For liability? Totally normal." She laid the form on the table like it was a napkin. "It doesn't affect ownership," she added. "Just how it's protected. Legal language. Nothing changes." The paper was thick, heavy. The kind that slides when your fingers are dry. I didn't sit down. "Let me read it later," I said. Rachel blinked. "It's just 2 pages. Want me to summarize?" "No, I'd rather go through it myself." She tapped her pen on the clipboard once. Twice. "Well, okay. But it's time sensitive." She turned and walked out. No hug. No coffee offer.
"No, thanks, Mom."
Just click-clack heels and the sound of Mason's tablet playing cartoons in the other room. I sat. Read the first line of the document. "Irrevocable designation of shared trust control effective upon signature." My throat tightened. I folded the form and tucked it into my cardigan pocket, the same cardigan I hadn't worn in weeks. By noon, I was at the local branch of Lake Charlevoix's credit union. I hadn't been there in months. Years, maybe. The teller, Claire, still remembered me. She smiled. Asked about Mason. Asked about the good lasagna recipe. I smiled back. But my hands didn't stop fidgeting. "Claire," I said quietly, "can I check on my savings account?" "The old one." Under my name only, she nodded. Clicked. Typed, squinted. Her smile dimmed. "Do you mean the one linked to your cabin maintenance fund?" I blinked. "No, the personal account. The one I set up in 1996. She hesitated. "It's still there. But there was a withdrawal last month. $1,200. My fingers curled around the purse strap. "I didn't make any withdrawal." Claire looked at the screen again. "It says authorized online transfer. Linked to an account ending in 0037. I don't have any account ending in 00437, and I never use online banking." I thanked her, took the printed transaction sheet, walked out into the cold without buttoning my coat. $1,200? Gone. No call? No email, no permission. The wind off the lake cut through my sweater like glass. Inside my pocket, the form Rachel handed me crinkled softly, like it already knew it had been caught. I came home just after 4. The sun hadn't set yet, but the light had that flat, wintry look, like it couldn't be bothered to shine anymore. Adam was in the garage, sorting through old fishing gear he hadn't touched since Mason was born. I walked straight in, paper clenched in my hand. "Did you touch my savings account?" He looked up, startled.
What? This?
I said, holding up the bank printout. "A transfer? Online. Last month." His eyes darted left, a tell he never learned to hide. "I thought Rachel." "Look, we needed to pay the plumber for the cabin. There was a leak." I cut him off. "There's a fund for that. The maintenance account, not my personal savings." He wiped his hands on his jeans, avoiding my gaze. "It's just money, Mom. Family money." I took a step closer. "It wasn't yours to take." Silence. Then, from behind me, heels on tile. Rachel, she walked in, arms folded, lips pursed like always. "What's the drama?" I turned. "Did you approve this?" I asked. $1,200? From my name-only account? She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Doris, you leave the finances so disorganized." "We were trying to help." "Help," I said. The word came out flat. She took another step, gesturing to the clipboard still on the kitchen island. "If you'd just signed the trust agreement, none of this would feel so chaotic." I walked over, picked up the form, held it by one corner like something that might stain. Then I tore it in half. Slowly, without breaking eye contact, Rachel gasped. "You?" "No," I said. "Not this time." Adam stepped forward. "Mom, come on. I trusted you both," I said, voice low. "With more than money." Rachel scoffed. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. You're not being erased, Doris. We're modernizing. You don't understand how things work now." I looked at her perfect hair, her polished nails, her eyes that never once softened. Then I turned to Adam. He still didn't speak, still didn't defend me. My fingers shook, but I kept my voice steady. "I won't be part of a system where I disappear piece by piece." The form sat torn on the island. One half curled slightly at the edge, like it was already trying to crawl away from me. "I'm keeping what's mine," I said. "And I'm watching everything now." I walked out, past the sink, past the photo of Mason taped to the fridge, his third grade school picture gap-toothed and smiling. Back in my room, I closed the door, locked it. First time in years. I pulled open the drawer, reached beneath the lining. There it was, the original deed, the real one. Bill's signature clear, the clause intact. And beneath it, his letter, the one he wrote the night he said, "Chore, if they start calling your legacy messy paperwork, that's when you hold tighter." I held it now. And outside, in the kitchen, I heard the sound of Adam sighing. And Rachel whispering, "She'll sign, she always does." But this time they were wrong. The silence came first, not loud, not dramatic, just a shift. The next morning, no one knocked on my door. The house smelled of burnt toast and aftershave. Adam had gone to work. Rachel's heels clicked out the front door before I made it down the stairs. No one said good morning. No coffee waiting in the pot. Just an empty mug with a lipstick ring I hadn't left. I sat at the kitchen table alone. The same table I scrubbed every Sunday for a decade. The same table where we celebrated Mason's first steps, right next to the salt shaker. Now, the chairs across from me felt like props. I picked up the newspaper, only to realize it was 3 days old. Nobody brought in the mail. Or maybe they stopped giving it to me. At lunch, I opened the fridge. The leftovers from the lasagna were gone. Even the apples I peeled for Mason's lunchbox, replaced by pre-packed granola bars. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. That evening, I sat in the living room, TV on, volume low. A crime show I used to watch with Bill. Adam walked in halfway through the episode. He didn't sit, just adjusted the thermostat. "Dinner's at 6, he muttered. "We're ordering Thai." He left before I could ask what he meant by we. At 6, I came down. The table was set for 3. Rachel, Adam, and Mason. No fourth plate, no eye contact, just the sound of chopsticks clicking against porcelain. I stood behind the chair for a full 10 seconds. No one invited me to sit. Mason glanced up, wide-eyed. "Grandma." Rachel cleared her throat. "She's probably already eaten." I hadn't, but I turned and walked back to my room, shut the door softly, not to be polite, just to hear that I still could. That night, I heard them laughing in the kitchen. The kind of laugh you give when you've won something? I stared at the ceiling. The fan spun slow. Each blade creaked like an old promise. The next morning, Mason slipped into my room. He smelled like maple syrup and peanut butter.
"Are you mad at Mommy?" he asked.
I shook my head. "I'm just quiet today." He sat beside me, held my hand like he used to when he was scared of thunder. I still like your sweaters, he whispered. Tears pushed up behind my eyes, but I blinked them back. Thank you, sweetheart. Then he added, almost like a secret, Mommy said the cabin is ours now. But I thought it was yours. I didn't answer. I just pulled the quilt over both of us. And in that moment I realized I wasn't forgotten. I was being erased. The next few days I stopped speaking first. Not out of spite. Out of strategy, I watched. Rachel tossed receipts into the trash without shredding. I waited until the house emptied, then fished them out. Cabin inspection fee, legal consultation with a firm I didn't recognize, a payment to Cedar Pines Transitional Living. That last one made my hands go cold. I folded the receipt and slipped it behind the drawer lining in my vanity, under Bill's old belt buckle. That night, I found the binder from 2008, the one labeled Alcott Family Trust Private, inside Bill's handwriting. Still neat. Still him. He'd tabbed one page in yellow. To plus of if legacy is at risk, call Harold K. Wilton, private line only. I stared at the number for a long time. The phone felt heavier than it should have, but the click of each digit felt certain. Harold answered on the second ring. Wilton speaking? It's Doris. Doris Alcott? A pause? Then, well, I'll be. You saved my Katie from that icy pond in '96, I smiled, despite myself. She saved herself. I just happened to have a rope. He chuckled. Still kept that photo in my office for 20 years. Then his tone changed. What's wrong? I told him. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. The trust papers. The refinancing. The way the house grew colder by the day. I think they're preparing something, I said. Something permanent. He didn't ask for proof. He said, fax me what you can. I'll pull public records on the cabin.
Quietly, I thanked him.
He added, and Doris? They picked the wrong widow. When I hung up, my hand trembled, but not from fear, from memory, from the part of me that used to fight for things before I let guilt shape me. I hadn't seen that side in years. The next morning, Mason knocked twice, then peeked in. Hi, Grandma. Hi, love. He hesitated, then placed a folded piece of paper on my nightstand. I left this in case they move your stuff again. I opened it after he left. His writing was wobbly, letters uneven. They said you'll forget things soon. But I know you won't. You remember everything? Love, M. I pressed the paper to my chest. Felt it flutter with my breath. Outside, Rachel barked something about carpool. Adam laughed, then stopped when he saw me at the stairs. I didn't say a word, just walked past them, calm. In my room, I opened the closet and reached behind the sweaters. The red folder was still there. But this time, I wasn't just holding it. I was preparing it. The invitation said casual cocktail, but Rachel made me change 3 times. Not the Navy, she'd said. It makes you look washed out. Then, 5 minutes before leaving, she handed me a scarf, bright orange silk. Try this. Makes you look alive. I wrapped it around my neck in silence. Alive wasn't a compliment, not from her. The car ride to Ronald's house was quiet. Mason played with a toy dinosaur in the back seat. Adam drove, radio low. I stared out the window, watching the birch trees pass by like skinny ghosts. Ronald lived in one of those lakefront homes with floor-to-ceiling glass and zero insulation from judgment. I hadn't seen him in over a decade. Not since Bill's funeral. Back then, he'd held my hand and said, anything you need, Doris. Your family's one of the good ones. Now I wasn't sure which ones. We still were. Inside, the house buzzed with guests in slacks and wine teeth. Cheese boards the length of battlefields. Laughter that didn't reach the eyes. Rachel moved fast, greeting air, kissing, claiming space. Doris, she said, handing me a tray of champagne flutes. Can you help pass these around? You know everyone here better than me. It was a command dressed as kindness. I took the tray, smiled, balanced it through the crowd like a ghost from another decade. Oh, Doris! Someone cooed. Still the gracious hostess. Someone else added, you haven't aged a bit. Except the eyes, they've seen things. I smiled again. My hands ached from holding the tray. At the corner, I spotted Ronald. Gray, thinner, but his posture still had that ex-sailor straightness. He didn't notice me. Rachel was already at his side, laughing, hand on his arm, voice pitched high like a TV anchor. I waited, hoped for a moment to slip in. Then she glanced over her shoulder and said, oh, Doris came with us. She's been so helpful with the house lately. It's like having a live-in grandma/caretaker. People laugh, not cruelly, not even loudly, but it stung. Something in my chest folded in half. I turned away before Ronald's eyes could meet mine. Walked back to the kitchen, set the tray down. One glass still full, still trembling. I pressed my palm flat on the counter. The marble was cold. Behind me, I heard a burst of laughter. Rachel again, always louder near men, then. Small footsteps. Mason. He looked up at me. Are you okay, Grandma? I smiled. Too quick? Too brittle? Of course, sweetheart. He didn't believe it. His fingers found mine under the counter. She said, you're just here. I nodded. Didn't speak. His eyes searched mine. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. The confusion, the loyalty, and something new, shame. Not his own, mine. Reflected back at me through him. Dessert was served around 8. Someone lit candles on a lemon tart. Ronald's favorite. I offered to help slice, but Rachel waved me off. You've done plenty already, Doris. Why don't you rest that wrist of yours? The comment landed like a slap wrapped in silk. I returned to the corner near the patio door, holding a glass of water that had long lost its chill. Ronald raised a toast. To good years, fewer regrets, and the friends who still remember your first mustache. Lauder, clinks. Even I smiled. Then Rachel chimed in, voice bright enough to cut tile. And to knowing when to pass the torch gracefully. Someone muttered, here, here? She wasn't looking at Ronald. She was looking at me. A long, deliberate look. Like a dog pressing its paw over a toy it already claimed. I stared down at the glass water. No lemon, no ice. Just clear and bitter. Some people, she added, just don't know when to step aside. But we're all learning. Lauder again. Smaller this time. Polite. Confused. Ronald's brow furrowed slightly. He glanced at me, but didn't speak. No one did at him. Not anyone. I stood up. Not fast, not loud. Just enough for the chair to scrape gently against the hardwood. I walked toward the front door. My scarf, that god-awful orange silk, trailed slightly, brushing the floor behind me like something trying to stay. I didn't look back. Mason followed me out 2 minutes later, ran down the steps in socked feet.
Grandma?
Wait! I stopped at the sidewalk under the yellow porch light. It buzzed faintly, the sound of a bulb near burnout. He grabbed my hand. Are you okay? I looked at him, really looked. His tie was crooked. His hair had that swirl in the back he hated. His eyes, they were bills. I'm fine, love, I said. You didn't eat cake? I wasn't hungry. He hesitated. Then whispered, Mom said you shouldn't come, but Dad said you'd behave. That one stung more than I expected. I bent down, brushed his hair back, kissed his temple. Go back inside. Keep warm. I want to come with you. I smiled. The first real one all evening. You already did. I walked down the street, alone. The wind picked up, sharp and dry. Each step felt like peeling something away. Not weakness, not defeat. Just the skin of someone I didn't want to be anymore. Someone who said yes too much. Who let herself become invisible at her own family's table. That night, I didn't cry. I opened Bill's letter again. Reread the line I knew by heart. Your silence is not your surrender. But one day it must end, and you... Dear listener, what would you have done? Spoken out loud in that moment, or walked away, carrying your dignity in silence? Ask comment 1 to speak up. Comment 2 to walk out. 5 found the receipt again the next morning. The one I had tucked behind the drawer lining. Cedar Pines Transitional Living Initial Consultation, $250 paid in full. At the time I thought it was a fluke, maybe a mistake. But now, after the birthday humiliation, the silence, the sidelong looks, I wasn't so sure. I opened my laptop. Took me 4 tries to remember the Wi-Fi password. Rachel had changed it last fall. The Cedar Pines website was sleek, muted beige tones. Photos of seniors laughing at card tables, holding mugs too clean to be real. Beneath the banner, compassionate care when you need it most. My fingers hovered, then clicked on admission services. There it was, ARC pre-admittance process. I read the bullet points. All optional family-initiated evaluations. A non-disclosure to resident until transition date. The financial consultation available through Family Trust. My throat tightened. I grabbed my coat. Didn't tell anyone where I was going. The drive took 23 minutes. The place sat behind a stand of pines off Route 19. Neat, quiet, unthreatening. Too perfect. Inside, the air smelled like lavender hand soap and something underneath. The faint metallic sharpness of cafeteria trays. A receptionist in mauve scrubs looked up. Can I help you? I nodded. I'm here about a file, possibly mine. Her smile didn't falter. Are you expecting an intake? No, but I'd like to check. She asked my name, spelled it aloud, Doris Alcott. I nodded. She clicked on her keyboard, brows lifting slightly. Yes, we have you listed as pre-admission pending. Initiated by an Adam Alcott and a Rachel Alcott.
2 months ago? I blinked, pending what?
She turned the screen slightly. Financial review complete. Room options discussed. They requested no contact until transition scheduled. Something inside me stilled. Not frozen. Just shifted. Like ice about to crack. I looked at the photos on the wall. Sunlit rooms. Friendly staff. One showed a woman my age laughing with a therapy dog. A life already prepared. Without asking me. Without telling me? I'd like a printed copy, I said. She hesitated. That would require family. I straightened. I'm the name on the file. Print it. She obeyed. The pages were warm when she handed them over. Still humming from the copier, I walked out, the packet pressed to my chest. Outside, the air smelled of pine mulch and late autumn rot. I sat in the car. Didn't start it yet. My hands shook. But not from fear. From clarity. They weren't just taking the cabin. They were taking me, bit by bit, form by form, signature by silence. And now they had drawn the outline of my disappearance. All I had to do was not fight. I made 2 copies at a gas station on County Road 8. The machine coughed and sputtered. The clerk didn't look up. Too busy arguing on speakerphone with someone named Cheryl. I slid the originals into a manila envelope. Kept 1 copy for myself. 1 for Harold Wilton. Back in the car, I wiped sweat from the steering wheel. Not from heat. It was barely 46 degrees. But my heart had been thudding since I saw the words transition authorization pending signature. I got home just before 3. Rachel was at the sink, chopping celery too loudly. You went somewhere, she asked, eyes not leaving the cutting board. Library, I said. Printer's still jammed upstairs. A pause. Next time, just ask. I could have helped, I managed. She didn't respond, just kept chopping. The knife rhythm felt deliberate. Upstairs, I slid the folder under my mattress briefly. But it didn't feel safe. Not with Rachel doing laundry every other Tuesday and folding things no one asked her to touch. That night, after they all went to bed, I slipped out to the cabin. The walk across the backyard was cold. Dew glazed the grass. The air smelled of wet leaves and wood smoke drifting from someone else's chimney. The cabin creaked when I opened the door. Same smell as always, cedar and old paper. I hadn't been here in weeks. Flicked on the lamp by the window seat, pulled back the rug. The floorboard came up easy. Inside, the old fireproof lockbox still sat where Bill left it. I unlocked it with the tiny key still taped inside a ceramic mug labeled World's Okayest Grandpa. Inside, few original deed of Bill's letter of our wedding photo and now Cedar Pines paperwork. I added a USB stick. The scanned documents. Labeled it Photos 1991 just in case. As I was locking up, I heard footsteps, soft, small. Mason stood at the doorway in flannel pajama pants and no shoes. His breath clouded in the air. Grandma,
I turned slowly.
You scared me. He stepped inside, hugging himself. I saw the light. I thought maybe you left. I crouched down, took his cold hands in mine, not without saying goodbye. He looked past me at the floorboard, then at the lockbox, but he didn't ask. Instead, he said, "Are you hiding treasure?" I smiled. Something like that. He tilted his head. "Is it safe?" I paused, then nodded. "With you around? Safer than ever." I gave him my cardigan. We walked back together slowly. At the door, before slipping inside, he whispered, "Mom says you get confused." I looked at him. "And what do you say?" He thought. Then shrugged. "You remember my birthday better than she does." I kissed the top of his head. Inside the house, all the lights were off. Except one. Rachel's office window. The glow of a screen, the shape of her pacing. But I wasn't afraid. I had my file. I had a name. I had a child still watching me. And for the first time in months, I had a plan. I didn't sleep that night. The house was still. Too still. Even the old clock in the hallway seemed to tick slower, like it too was unsure of time anymore. I sat by the cabin window, wrapped in Bill's flannel shirt, the one with the missing button he refused to replace. The letter lay open on my lap, creases worn soft, ink slightly faded. I read the same line 5 times. Tore. Some things we build to live in. Tore others to remember who we are. I looked around the room. The walls still smelled faintly of cedar and mothballs. The rug had a patch where Mason spilled cocoa 2 winters ago. This place held echoes and ghosts. But not the kind that haunt. The kind that whisper. Remember a flashback? It was 1982. Bill had just gotten a bonus for finishing a downtown post office 3 weeks ahead of schedule. He drove me up to the edge of Lake Charlevoix. Just trees and silence and sky. "This is where we build it," he said. I laughed. "Build what?" He stepped out onto the crunchy gravel, arms wide. Freedom, disguised as wood. We didn't have blueprints. We had graph paper, stubbornness, and coffee in a thermos from Sears. The nights were cold that fall. I wore 2 sweaters. Bill hammered beams by flashlight. At night, we shared stories like they were currency. "This'll be for Christmases," I'd say. "And old age," he'd grin. "We're will eat too much pie and nap twice a day." It took 6 months. 6 months of sawdust in our shoes, blisters on our palms, hope under every nail. Back to now. The wind knocked softly against the window pane. Outside, the pines swayed like they were agreeing with something I hadn't yet said. I reached for my journal. The one Rachel said was sentimental clutter. I flipped past grocery lists and old recipes, found a blank page, and wrote to her, if I had fought earlier, would I still have a place at their table? Torture is silence, the very thing that made me so easy to ignore. I stared at the question for a long time, then added, I kept giving. But whoever taught me how to keep? I closed the journal, tucked it under the cushion, and for the first time, and I didn't feel old. I felt unfinished. By sunrise, I had a list.
Not written in rage, but in ink black. Neat.
Underlined, 3 columns. The documents altered Eli account's access to the names involved. I added dates beside each. Rachel's legal firm, the online withdrawal from my savings, the consultation at Cedar Pines. This wasn't anger anymore, it was clarity. At 8:03 a.m., I called Harold Wilton. He answered on the second ring. Same as before. Harold. I said, I'm ready. He didn't ask what I meant. Just said, I'm sending a courier this afternoon. No one at the house needs to know. I gave him the address of the P.O. box I hadn't touched in 4 years. The key still worked. I need the cabin trust reinstated, I said. Sole authority. Retroactive clause.
Quiet clause 2, he paused. You want a trigger back clause?
I said. I want to be the one who decides when silence ends. He exhaled slowly. You sound like Bill. I looked out the cabin window. The lake was still, but the clouds were moving fast. I don't want revenge, I said. No, I want memory. With teeth. That afternoon, I brought the journal back into the house. Nobody noticed. Adam was working late. Rachel was on a conference call about client boundaries. Mason sat in the corner, doing homework on the iPad. He glanced at me once. Just once. Then went back to typing. At dinner, he slipped a folded Post-it into my hand. I opened it in my lap. I booked your notary on Thursday. Use the school iPad. Don't tell Mom. I looked up. He was sipping soup like nothing happened. I reached over, touched his wrist. Thank you. He grinned. Just a little. And said, They think I don't listen. But I do that night. I tucked the documents into a new folder. This one blue. Labeled it in ballpoint F Personal Legacy Active. I hid it inside an old puzzle box in the attic. Under Monopoly. Between dust and dessous. Then I wrote a letter to myself. You do not owe them comfort for erasing you. You owe yourself the sound of your own voice. I sealed it, slid it under the pillow. For the nights I might forget what strength feels like. As the house went quiet again, I lit a candle in the kitchen. Cinnamon scent filled the air, faint, but warm. I stared into the flame, not to feel peace, but to remember how quiet fire starts. Justice wouldn't be loud, not mine. But it would come. I didn't take back everything, just the things they assumed were theirs. First was the school tuition. Mason's private academy auto, deducted from my checking every quarter, a system Rachel had set up years ago. Back when she still called me Mom. I called the school directly. Due to recent family changes? I said, I'll be pausing payment, temporarily. The woman on the line hesitated. I'm sorry, Mrs. Alcott. We were told this account was jointly authorized. I smiled into the receiver. Not anymore. Next came the cabin classification. I met with a private banker not from our usual branch but a newer one 2 towns over. We sat in a small glass office. She wore round glasses and smelled faintly of eucalyptus. Mom, she said, scanning the paperwork Harold had prepped. You're requesting to convert this cabin deed into an independent holding? I nodded. It was never meant to be communal. It's mine. She leaned in, lowered her voice. If anyone contests, you'll need to show clear history of funding. I opened the folder. Receipts, mortgage, construction payments, all in my name. She flipped through slowly. You've been quietly holding this family up, she said. I didn't reply. She stamped the form. Outside, the wind picked up. Leaves chased each other across the parking lot like children playing tag with no one watching. Back at home, I kept my movements careful. I still made tea, still folded Mason's sweatshirts, still pretended not to notice Rachel watching me with narrowed eyes. But the silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was loaded. 2 days later, I heard it. From the hallway, Rachel's voice, clipped fast, frustrated. These numbers don't match the last statement. Something's been pulled. I paused with a cup in my hand, stood behind the wall quiet. Ooh, touched the tuition draft, she snapped, silence. Then Adam? I don't know. Maybe? The school? Rachel scoffed. They don't just cancel tuition. Someone's screwing with the accounts. Mason shuffled past me just then, iPad under his arm. He glanced up, eyes wide. I winkied. He didn't smile, but his shoulders relaxed. That night, I baked an apple crisp. The scent filled the house. Rachel didn't eat. Adam took 2 servings like he always did when nervous. I sat at the table, slowly sipping my tea. You look rested, Adam said. I nodded. I've been sleeping better. Rachel pushed her plate away. Good. We all function better when people stay in their lanes. I looked at her, held her gaze for just a second longer than polite, then stood to wash my cup. As the water warmed beneath my hands, I whispered, then I suppose it's time I chose my own lane. The notary came at noon on Thursday. A small woman named Glenda with hair the color of root beer and a voice like wind chimes. We met at the local library. I signed every page slowly. Glenda slid the final document toward me. As Mason Alcott Educational Trust, just private, irrevocable. Set to activate on his 18th birthday. I'd named Harold Wilton as backup trustee. Rachel and Adam weren't mentioned. When Glenda left, I sat in the reading room for a while. The library smelled of old carpet and lemon pledge. In the corner, a teenager napped under a hoodie. The heater hummed like a tired lullaby. I folded the documents into a navy envelope, wrote for Mason in block letters. That evening, Rachel exploded. I heard the cabinet slam. Then footsteps, sharp, unforgiving. She stormed into the living room, waving a paper. This came from the county office. I kept my gaze on the fire. You changed the cabin's legal designation. You pulled it from our family trust. I didn't answer. Adam stood by the window, arms crossed, saying nothing, like always. Rachel's voice rose. You are unbelievable. After everything we've managed for you, manage it, I said, still facing the fire. Yes, because you clearly can't. Not anymore. I turned. Her face was flushed, hair too perfect, breath too rehearsed. I see, I said softly. Oh, spare me the noble act. She stepped closer. You think you're some quiet matriarch, leaving legacy in letters? You're just scared, old and scared. And this, she held up the paper, is petty. You'll die bitter and alone. I stood, walked to the kitchen, opened the drawer where we kept birthday candles and thumbtacks, took out a white envelope, sealed, unmarked. I set it on the dining table, taped to the front for Adam. For Rachel, read together, she didn't touch it, just stared like it might detonate. I went upstairs, packed slowly, just 2 bags. My hands didn't tremble, not this time. By morning, I was gone. The sun had barely risen. The house still smelled of last night's curry and hurt pride. I left a second envelope in the cabin, tucked beneath the photo of Bill holding baby Mason at the lake. Inside, one line tore. Sometimes, losing a mother is the only way to understand what she gave. Later that day, I got a message from Harold. Hall filings complete. Trust secured. Cabin clear. You're free? Zayd, I sat on the porch of the cabin, Mason's drawing taped to the door. The one with the stick figure grandma and a lake full of ducks. The breeze smelled like pine and quiet victory. Folks, there's a kind of justice that doesn't shout. It just closes the door, signs the paper, and walks away whole. Assert if you've ever been erased by the ones you raised. Share your story below. You're not alone. At the conference room at Mason's school smelled like paper, lemon polish, and weak coffee. A large projector hummed softly at the far end. On the table, printed spreadsheets were neatly stacked beside a tray of mini muffins. Rachel sat at the center, legs crossed. Blazer-crisped, she smiled politely, but her eyes darted, scanning, calculating. To her left, the school finance officer adjusted her glasses. So, you're requesting to reassign the scholarship designation under your name? The woman asked. Rachel nodded, smooth. It was originally a joint arrangement, but we're simplifying things. The woman clicked a few keys. Brows pinched slightly. There's a flag here, she said. The original sponsor has been updated. Rachel tilted her head. I'm sorry? According to this record? The woman continued. The Educational Trust now names a sole contributor. I'm sure that's a clerical error, Rachel said, her voice still light. The finance officer pulled out a folder. Actually, we received notarized confirmation last week. New trustee, full control, no third-party amendments. Rachel's voice sharpened. There must be a mistake. I'm his mother. The woman didn't flinch. I understand. But you're not on the trust anymore. Rachel's smile cracked. But I was the one who handled tuition for years. That may be, the woman said gently, but you no longer have access. Silence. Rachel's cheeks flushed, one hand gripping her phone too tightly. Who changed it? A voice behind her answered. I did. Heads turned. Doris stood at the doorway. Cardigan gray. Posture straight. A soft navy envelope in hand. Rachel stared. You? Doris stepped forward.
Hello, Janet.
She said, nodding to the finance officer. The woman smiled. Mrs. Alcott, good to see you again. Rachel stood slowly, her voice low. You're not supposed to be here. Doris didn't blink. I started this trust before you knew how to spell curriculum. She placed the envelope on the table. For Mason. Finalized. Irrevocable. Rachel laughed, short and bitter. This is ridiculous. You're making a scene? Doris turned to her. No, dear. You made a plan to erase me. I'm just showing up. Where you hoped I wouldn't. The room went still. Even the projector paused mid-slide. Outside, wind brushed against the windows. Faint and rhythmic, like applause no one dared to give. Rachel's fingers drummed against the edge of the table. The sound sharp, rushed. She's confused, she said to the finance officer. Mason's grandmother's had some decline. Doris didn't move. Rachel's voice turned syrupy. She forgets things. Tells stories that never happened. We've been concerned for a while. Janet, the officer, looked unsure, pen in hand, but not writing. Doris opened the navy envelope. Inside one letter, faintly yellowed. Bill's handwriting still firm even near the end. She unfolded it slowly. I've never read this out loud, she said, voice low. But now seems right. She held the page with steady hands. Chor, if you're reading this, Doris Horcher, it means they've underestimated you. Torture legacy isn't granted. It's guarded. Tortort, and I know you. Tor, you've spent your life giving. Tor, now it's time to keep something. Silence. Rachel scoffed. This is ridiculous. That letter could be from anyone. Doris looked at her. Then why are you sweating? Rachel's face froze. The finance officer cleared her throat gently. Mrs. Alcott, is this letter part of the trust documentation? Doris nodded. A copy was notarized and attached last week. Rachel stepped back, jaw tight. This is theater. Doris placed the letter on the table. Neatly, as if setting down a family photograph no one bothered to look at. I'm not here to argue. She looked at Janet. I'm here to confirm what's mine. From the back of the room, the door creaked open. Adam stood there, buttoned-down shirt, shoulders slumped. A witness in his own mother's reckoning, their eyes met, she waited. But he didn't speak, didn't nod, didn't sit. Just stood there, like a man who'd arrived late to a truth he couldn't handle. Doris blinked once. Not to hide emotion, to end it, she turned back to the table. To be clear, she said to the room, the cabin is no longer in the family trust. Mason's education is covered, privately, and my legacy is not up for discussion. The projector buzzed. The heater clicked. No one said a word. Outside, a single leaf scraped across the window pane. It sounded like applause. Doris didn't wait for anyone to speak. She folded Bill's letter, slipped it back into her coat pocket. Buttoned it shut steady, the other clenched in quiet finality. She turned. Rachel stood frozen, mouth open, but no sound came. Adam took a slow step back. Didn't meet her eyes typical. Doris walked past them both. No rage, no triumph, just completion. In the hallway, the lights buzzed faintly. Lockers lined the wall, Mason's school colors taped unevenly on each. And there he was, sitting cross-legged on the bench outside the office, Lego keychain in one hand, lunchbox in the other. His head lifted when he saw her. Grandma? She smiled. Held out both arms. He ran into them without hesitation. The warmth of his hug steadied her bones more than any document could. You came, he whispered. She brushed his hair back. It was time. He looked up, serious. Did they yell at you? No, sweetheart. Not this time. She reached into her coat, pulled out a tiny envelope. White. Unsealed. For later, she said. Not for your parents. For you? He nodded, didn't ask what was inside. She leaned in close. Someday, she whispered. This will all be yours. He blinked. The house. No, she said. The truth? He didn't fully understand. But he understood enough. She kissed his forehead. Behind her, the door clicked open. Rachel stepped out, face pale, hands empty. She saw Mason. Then turned back inside. Adam followed seconds later. His tie was crooked. His silence still perfect. He walked past them both, one glance, no words. Mason held tighter. Doris exhaled. The air smelled like old paint, rubber floors, and something else of freedom. Not loud, not flashy, but real. She rose to her feet, took Mason's hand, and walked him out into the light. No one stopped her. No one dared. Sometimes justice doesn't need a courtroom. Sometimes it just needs a bench, a child who sees, and the courage to walk away holding your name. What about you? If you had one shot to reclaim your worth, would you take it quietly or make them hear it? Comment 1, to walk out with grace. Comment 2, to speak your truth out loud. A kiss the first morning at the cabin came without alarms. No footsteps overhead, no clipped voices down the hall, just birdsong and the slow rustle of pine branches outside the window. Doris lay still for a moment. Let the quiet settle into her bones. The bed was softer than she remembered. Maybe it had missed her. Too, she got up slowly, slipped on her robe, the cotton one Bill bought in 1995, the one with the frayed sleeve. Downstairs, the floorboards creaked like old friends greeting her. She didn't mind the dust, didn't mind the silence. Everything here still smelled like cedar and faint fireplace ash. She opened the kitchen window. Cool air drifted in. With it, the scent of damp earth and late autumn. She put the kettle on, let it whistle gently. No one rushed her. No one asked what flavor. She chose chamomile. The blue mug had a small chip at the rim, same place it always had. She smiled, carried it to the porch. The wooden steps moaned under her weight, but they held. Outside, the lake shimmered. Not loud, not boastful. Just there, still. She wrapped herself in the flannel throw. Pulled out the notebook she tucked in her cardigan the day she left. It had a pressed maple leaf between the first pages. She flipped to a blank one, picked up the pen, let it sit between her fingers a while, then began. Dear future me? Torchar, if you ever forget why you're here. Torchor, remember this morning. Torchor, the sound of nothing being demanded. Torchor, the warmth of your own hand holding your own cup. Torchor, the fact that no one is taking from you. Torchor, this piece was not gifted. Torchor, you carved it with every silence you endured. Torchor, with every piece of dignity you refused to trade for comfort. She paused, breathed in. A crow called from somewhere behind the trees. She added, Tor, you are not invisible here. Torta, you are home. She closed the notebook, set it on her lap, held the mug between her palms. The steam curled toward her face. Not a single voice called her name. And for once that felt exactly right. The envelope came on a Thursday. No return address. Just a school logo and Mason's name in neat block print. Doris brought it in with the rest of the mail. 2 catalogs, 1 grocery coupon, and this. She set the others aside, turned the envelope over once, twice, then opened it. Inside, a single sheet, folded carefully. On top, a sticky note in blue ink. Hi, Mrs. Alcott. Tor, we thought you'd like to have a copy. Mason's essay was chosen for display at next week's assembly. Ms. Jacobs. Grade 4. Doris unfolded the paper. The page smelled like printer ink and glue stick. She sat by the window. Read slowly. My hero is someone who doesn't fly or punch. She doesn't drive fast or fight crime. She makes cinnamon toast. She knows where all the lost socks go. She always saves me the soft corner of the pie. My grandma tells the truth. Even when no one listens. She taught me that quiet people still matter. That being kind is stronger than being loud. When she walks, she makes the floor whisper instead of creak. She's like a secret. But only the kind you want to keep forever. Doris blinked. Once. Then again. She traced her finger along the last line. If I could be brave like anyone, I'd be brave like her. A tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. She let it fall. Land on the page. Darken the word brave. Outside, a squirrel darted across the porch railing. A pine cone fell, rolled twice, stopped. She leaned back in the chair, held the paper to her chest, felt the heartbeat beneath it. Bill never got to read something like this, but maybe he always knew it would come. She looked around the room. No noise, no clutter, just breath, wood, memory. Then she smiled. Not from pride. From something gentler, like being found by someone you thought had stopped looking. She whispered to the quiet, maybe legacy isn't what you leave behind. Maybe it's who stays. The morning came soft and gray. Doris sat at the cabin desk, mug of cocoa by her side, steam rising slow. Outside, the lake whispered under a layer of mist. Inside, the only sound was pen to paper. She titled the page carefully, For When I'm Not Around, But You Still Feel Me? Her handwriting was slower these days, but every curve had weight. Dear Mason, if you're reading this, it means I'm not in the room. But I'm not far. She paused, Listen to the clock tick 3 times before continuing chore. This cabin has rules. Chore not the kind you find on laminated paper or taped to a fridge. She smiled to herself. Chore rule 1 always make cocoa on cold mornings. Rule 28 don't swat the muths. They've been here longer than you. Rule 3 keep one book near the window, even if you're too busy to read it.
Rule 4 if someone cries in this house, don't ask why. Sit, pour tea.
Wait, the pen hesitated. Chore rolled.
If you ever feel small, come here. Open the window. Listen. This place remembers how big you really are. She looked over at the corner shelf. Still held Bill's radio. Still smelled of pine. I didn't leave you money. Not jewels or paintings. I left you breath. In room. In stories that don't end just because I'm not here to finish them. She signed it with her name, but added, in parentheses, Paza or whoever you need me to be today, then folded the paper once, tucked it into the desk drawer, right beside Bill's last notebook, the one with the red ribbon. She closed the drawer, pressed her palm to it, and whispered, I'll be right here, kiddo. The cabin door groaned open. Mason stepped inside, one hand still on the knob. Dust floated in lazy ribbons across the light. The air smelled the same, cedar, old cotton, a hint of something warm. He set his backpack down, brushed his fingers across the windowsill. A dead moth rested near the corner. Untouched, he smiled. In the kitchen, the kettle still worked. The same blue mug waited in the cabinet, chipped in the exact same place. He didn't boil water, not yet. Instead, he walked to the desk, pulled open the top drawer, inside a folded letter, and a notebook with a faded red ribbon. He opened the letter first. The paper had yellowed. The ink hadn't. He read every line. Twice, his chest tightened on Rule 4.
If someone cries in this house, don't ask why. Sit.
Pour tea.
Wait, he didn't pour tea, but he sat and waited. His eyes burned. Not from sadness. From memory too full to hold. He looked out the window. Outside, the lake shimmered. Older, but not changed. He opened the window. Let in the air. It smelled like moss and wind and wood smoke from someone else's chimney. He breathed deep, closed his eyes. There were no footsteps, no voice, no ghost, just warmth like a hand pressed gently against his back. He whispered, "Aye, Grandma," silence answered, but not the kind that meant gone, the kind that meant, "I hear you." He folded the letter carefully, placed it back where it came from. Before leaving, he left one thing behind, a new piece of paper, blank. But at the top, he wrote, "Tor, for whoever needs her next." Then he closed the drawer and walked out into the afternoon light. The trees swayed gently. The wind curled through the pines. And as he reached the steps, he smiled. She was right. She never really left.